On the 10th of February 1503, inside the walls of the Tower of London, specifically inside the medieval Queen's lodgings, the first Tudor Queen, Elizabeth of York, died following giving birth to a baby girl. Her death devastated her husband, Henry VII, and he experienced severe bouts of ill health because of his grief. Elizabeth of York's funeral was huge, and she was buried inside of Westminster Abbey. Today, the first Tudor king and queen lie in the heart of the Lady Chapel, the large Tudor mausoleum that was built for the kings and queens of England. But on Elizabeth's coffin was a large, lifelike effigy of the queen, and for many this was the first time they'd seen their queen. But today this effigy does survive over 500 years later, and it offers us a glimpse as to what the first Tudor queen looked like. And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. In 1502, Elizabeth of York became pregnant again, and she went into her confinement, the period before giving birth, inside of the Tower of London. Despite the fact that during the medieval period, the Tower of London was home to the murder of a king, Henry VI, it was a palatial palace and it was used as a royal residence. It wasn't the notorious Tudor prison and site of torture and execution that it would become in the subsequent decades. Elizabeth's quarters were known to have been decorated with clouds and roses and positive images, and on the 2nd of February 1603, Elizabeth of York gave birth to a daughter whom she named Catherine, after Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII and the widow of her other son, Arthur Tudor. But 9 days later, Elizabeth of York died, succumbing to what seemed to have been a postpartum infection. Her death broke the heart of Henry VII, the king, and Henry would, to grieve, retreat into his own quarters and rooms and would not leave. He even became very sick and nearly died himself due to the grief that he suffered. But the only person that could pick him up was his mother, Margaret Beaufort. Henry VII did not usually show much emotion, but he now openly wept at court, and he had in over 2 years lost his eldest son and heir, a baby daughter, and now his wife, and he was then forced to send his eldest daughter Margaret to Scotland due to a peace treaty that he had agreed to. The funeral of Elizabeth of York was a very expensive one which went against what Henry VII was known for. Queen Elizabeth was laid in state inside the Tower of London's chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, and it was surrounded by her loyal ladies for many days. It was arranged that she would be buried inside of Westminster Abbey, and her coffin was draped in gold and was watched over for 9 nights by her ladies, 4 gentlewomen, 2 officers at arms, and 7 yeomen and grooms. Daily masses were sung by bishops around her body, and on the day of the funeral, the coffin was drawn from the Tower of London to Westminster Abbey. It was pulled on a hearse by 6 horses draped in black velvet, and her 8 ladies were riding behind the coffin on horseback. Behind them were hundreds of people, including regular citizens of London, noblemen and foreign dignitaries who had come for the funeral. There were 5,000 torches that illuminated the path to Westminster Abbey, and candles were held by 37 virgins dressed in white. It was a huge Queen's funeral, and once the coffin arrived at Westminster Abbey, her coffin was placed on the high altar surrounded by 1,000 candles. But on her coffin, throughout the procession, was the funeral effigy of Elizabeth of York. This was a wooden model of the Queen, which was said to have been very lifelike. It was dressed in the robes of state of the Queen, and on top of the effigy was placed a crown. Her hair on the effigy flowed down to her shoulders, and in her right hand she held a sceptre. The effigy fingers were covered in rings and gold and precious stones, and this was for many people in London the first time that they'd ever seen an image of their Queen. They did not have access to portraits or readily available images, and the lifelike effigy was a symbol of the power of the monarchy and the woman who was inside of the coffin. The effigy of Queen Elizabeth of York remained on the coffin until the time came to lower her body into the grave. Inside of Westminster Abbey, the Bishop of London sanctified the grave, and the effigy was taken from the coffin just before this. Elizabeth's chamberlain and gentlemen ushers then broke their staves of office and threw them into the grave, symbolising that their duty to the Queen was over. The funeral effigy of Elizabeth of York was then taken away, and presumably it was held inside of Westminster Abbey for many centuries, but recently it did emerge and was placed on display. Inside the upper galleries at the Abbey today, this effigy can be viewed, and it shows the Queen with a very pensive look on her face. Her eyebrows are semicircular and very pronounced, and she has a very round forehead. Elizabeth's eyes also look rather small, especially her pupils, and her nose is rather large, and she does have smaller lips. Her funeral effigy today does not have any hair on it, but during the funeral of Elizabeth, a wig showing the Queen with blonde, ready hair was used. Following the funeral, Elizabeth of York was laid to rest inside of a grave temporarily before the tomb was built for her and her husband, and the pair were then buried inside of this. The tomb inscriptions for the pair state, "Here lies Henry VII of that name, formerly King of England, son of Edmund, Earl of Richmond. He was created king on August 22nd, and immediately afterwards on October 30 he was crowned at Westminster in the year of our Lord 1485. He died subsequently on April 21 in the 53rd year of his age, and reigned for 23 years, 8 months less 1 day. Here is situated Henry VII, the glory of all the kings who lived in his time by reason of his intellect, his riches, and the fame of his exploits, to which were added the gifts of bountiful nature, a distinguished brow, an august face, a heroic stature. Joined to him, his sweet wife was very pretty, chaste and fruitful. They were parents happy in their offspring, to whom, land of England, you owe Henry VIII. Elizabeth's tomb inscription states, "Here lies Queen Elizabeth, daughter of the former King Edward IV, sister of the formerly appointed King Edward V, once the wife of King Henry VII, and the renowned mother of Henry VIII. She met her day of death in the Tower of London on the 11th day of February in the year of our Lord 1502, having fulfilled the age of 37 years. On top of their tomb is an incredible effigy of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. Elizabeth wears a close-fitting coif, and she has had her hands clasped together, as does her husband, as if they are resting or in prayer. It's almost certain that the architects and sculptors who created her tomb effigy would have used the funeral effigy to create a similar likeness to the Queen for her tomb. This today has stood the test of time, and the image of Elizabeth of York on the tomb does carry remarkable similarities to the wooden effigy that still survives. It was common practice to do this, as the sculptors who made tombs for the royals had only effigies and a handful of contemporary paintings to create a lifelike image of the king or the queen. But Elizabeth of York today is remembered as the first Tudor Queen of England who reigned alongside her husband Henry VII as the consort. She was a remarkable woman whose marriage ended the long civil war known as the Wars of the Roses, but Elizabeth gave birth to Henry VIII, the man who would become probably the most infamous king that England ever had. There was little in his early life to show how much of a tyrant he would be, and it is known that Elizabeth was a great mother to her children, but her funeral effigy can still be seen and viewed 500 years on since its creation and since it rested on top of her coffin. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.